Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Catholic ReCon Testimonies from Reverts and Converts. I'm your host, Eddie Trask. Please subscribe. Please share your stories, your family stories, friend stories. Please reach out. I would appreciate it. And please comment as well and share these videos. It would be greatly appreciated. This week's guest is Jeff Klem. Jeff, thank you for being here. Let's start there. Just really
Thank you
appreciate
very much.
you taking time at this hour to be with me. Appreciate it.
No, I appreciate it. Thanks a lot, Eddie. It's been a pleasure talking to you, getting this set up, uh, and just, living life. And been a interesting road to get to this point.
Yeah, no, and that's why I respect you, kind of having that dialogue with me. I mean, this goes back several months. We've been trying to get this
Yeah, I think it was
locked
like
in.
prior to Easter, like right around, right before Good Friday, we connected.
Yeah, that's right. A good time to connect for sure. So,
hmm
Jeff, if you would, why don't we begin with maybe childhood, early formative years, and maybe from a religious perspective, what was your upbringing like?
Yes, so I was born in northeastern Pennsylvania in a town called Scranton. Got kind of big off of that show, The Office, right?
Never heard of it. Never heard of
Yeah.
it.
And heard too much of it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But no, but it was cool. But I lived in one of the suburbs in the valley, and I was raised Catholic. I was baptized in the church. My father and mother had me baptized. My godfather and godmother are my aunt, who passed away, and my uncle, who has also passed away, unfortunately. But we were all tight in the church, and it all revolved around my grandmother, pretty much. She was kind of the rock, and this is all on my father's side of the family. But my mother was very participative, and it was a good neighborhood to grow up in. Like we were able to ride our bikes up and down the streets. We had alleyways to go through, hills to go down when, you know, for snow and everything. It was an absolute blast. Uh, so I have no complaints of my childhood. Like my childhood was awesome looking back at it. Like from, the time that I could first remember up until like 10, 11 is just I guess would be the golden years, right? Most of us think our teen years and like our early 20s, but really looking back, I mean, when you have the freedom of being able to just play and create and, having, especially growing up, I was born in 86. So, like, even though I'm a millennial, I was raised very traditional. Like computers didn't come into the scene until way late. And, it was awesome, like big block parties and everything. So it was fun. And I was an altar boy. I received First Communion. And I had great experience in the church. I had a very, honest and holy priest, uh, who has since passed, God rest his soul. But he married my father, and I think even possibly my grandmother at some point. And so it was a Polish church. Everything was very ethnic where I was living in that area. It was a town called Oliphant, and there was like a church and a bar, and a church and a bar, and a church and a bar. And each one was a different nationality. They each had their own like clubs and you know, legions and whatnot. But it was a good it was a good upbringing, and I'm glad I had it. And I spent a lot of time with my grandmother because most of my parents worked. So when both went off to work, I would spend the whole day with her. So I would be running around Oliphant and visiting the churches and stuff. And it was a wholesome upbringing.
That's awesome. So, golden years, uh, earlier than, again, as you said, many would expect. What about the teenage years? What about kind of coming of age and all that? Do you remember that period and
Well,
did you have
yeah.
difficulties?
So the difficulties in life, I guess, started for me around like just prior to my 10th birthday. Uh, I remember just tension in the household, and I have a sister who's 4 years younger than me, my only sibling, and she was just, 6 or 5 at the time, so she really was just starting to make memories. So she doesn't really remember what it was like. Uh, and eventually, my mother pulled me aside one day, and here I am, a 9-year-old kid, and she's telling me, that she was leaving my father, and uh, that she was going to with another guy, and that she had cheated on my dad. And like, I'm a 9-year-old kid trying to absorb all of this, and it was just like, I guess looking back, I appreciate the honesty, but I don't think I needed to be concerned with any of that. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah,
Like,
yeah.
but it is what it is. And, and that started off like a really long trail of resentment towards, my mother. And, up to that point, ironically, like my father, he worked a lot, obviously. And he, he wasn't a huge figure in my life. But at that point, I just decided, I said, okay, well, whatever happens, I'm gonna stay with dad. And uh it was just kind of like, it wasn't like out of either meanness or anything. I guess I felt bad, and I felt like the boy had to stay with the father because my
Mhm.
sister was gonna go with my mother. And so yeah, I think we had my 10th birthday, and my birthday's in the summer. And then immediately after that, uh my mother left. She got an apartment. It wasn't far away. It was only a town over, still in the same school district. So, it was a very small, try, like a valley town. We have
Sure.
the Lackawanna River running through the middle of it, and then these beautiful hills on either side. So, a lot of different areas, but easy to get around. And so it wasn't so much of a shock at first, like I was able to deal with it. And there were some traumatizing things that happened during that, just from a emotional and psychological perspective, uh, because I was put through a lot of just knowledge that I just shouldn't have had at the time, like of what was happening in the middle of my mother's relationships with between her and my, you know what I mean? Like, just
Yeah.
things that I didn't need to be involved in. And I mean, to my dad's credit, he never talked to me about it. It was always my mother talking to me about it. And it was just, it is what it is. But in a weird way, it did make us develop a bond. It was just a negative one.
Sure.
What do they call that? Like a destructive relationship, you know what I mean?
Yep.
But so to make a long story short, like and I was thinking about this before I came on here with you, and I was trying to remember that time span, because there was a time span after that all happened where my father and I lived alone in my childhood house, and he was fixing it up to sell it because he had to downsize, and we were going to move into an apartment just literally a yard behind me, right? So that wasn't going to be a huge deal. We were going to lose the house, but it had memories, but I've lost a lot of them, like, because I
Yep.
was trying real hard to come up with some. And fortunately, I did. And, I might not have the timeline right, but that's when computers were first introduced to me. And that ended up being a really big player in my life. It was funny because it was kind of like that Johnny Cash song about how he was bringing parts home from the Buick,
Yep.
uh, slowly building the car. Well, my
Yep.
father worked for a sheet metal company that made the first cases for IBM when computers first became like home things. And they would send them the components to test inside the case. So as a new generation would come, they'd have these old components, and then they would like bid them off. So slowly but surely, we got all these components, and we built a machine that had Windows 3.1, and we were able to play like Doom, and it was awesome. And I remember getting like a VHS cassette for Excel, like it was like not pre 2000. It was awesome. But that was the first taste I had, and then eventually we would get one for that apartment that we moved into. But that was one of the memories that I was able to recall, and I had fun with my father doing that. And then in my early teen years, I spent predominantly with my father. There wasn't as much tension between parents at that point in time, which was good. My sister and my mother were kind of doing their thing. They shared custody. We never had to go through court or anything.
Okay.
It was kind of a mutual respect, and as messed up as everything turned out to be, it stayed all those years, which was a good thing, and I commend my parents for that. But it was like kind of half on, half off, and every other weekend type deal. But I was mainly with my father, and through that time, it was actually pretty fun. My father started dating my now stepmother. She was a very nice lady, and he got me really involved. We built a model. One of my most prominent memories is we built a model car or an RC car, but it was from the ground up, like nut by nut, bolt by bolt, and it took us probably like 6 months of doing it. But it was one of the most memorable and fun experiences of my life, and I still have that car on my office desk over in the corner over there.
That's
It's just to
awesome.
remind me of like good times with him, and he taught me how to bowl, and I bowled in school, and I did awesome, and golf, and I still golf to this day, and we go out golfing, and those were not. I had the golden years as like just being a kid in video games, right? But those were the most wholesome years of my life. Uh, that I could remember, right?
Sure.
I'm sure when I was a child, things were very wholesome. I just don't remember it. And and then things were pretty good up until probably the point that I got to high school. And I just decided to be the kid who acted up. I don't know why. I guess looking back, it was probably attention, right? Like if you're not getting attention at home, maybe you want to get attention other places. But I didn't get attention by being a bad guy or being, like somebody who would do like wild and crazy things. I would like, I was friends with everybody, right? I would make jokes and I would crack. There was no person that I wouldn't talk to. So I was the social guy, but I wasn't part of any group, right? So and then eventually I collected my own, group of friends that we ended up sticking pretty close through the latter years and after high school until I ended up going, down that dark path of addiction. But high school was just looking back, everybody, to any kids watching this, you're so scared going into high school, and you should be because it's going to be a formative time of your life. But looking back, I'm 37. It's like high school. If I could take high school in a day, I'd go back to high school. You know what I mean? Like high school was nothing. I know some people get real traumatized by school, and I understand that, but it wasn't my experience. And even for as bad as, bullying or this or that, it was like compared to normal life, high school is just a
Mhm.
blink of the eye, right?
Sure.
But I was lucky enough that I took academics very seriously up to the point of like probably 10th grade, and I had always been smart or quote unquote gifted. They used to have like these weird gifted programs in school or whatnot, but I I quickly realized that like learning just academia bored me, and I wouldn't do my homework. I would pass the tests, but I wouldn't do my homework. So it was that was just the battle of my school career. So, halfway through high school, I realized that college, it wasn't that I was like giving up on myself. I just realized that I wanted to do a trade. I wanted to do something. I felt like, I could use just my natural wits and persuasion skills and everything that I had acquired up to that point and hard work. One thing that my father has instilled in me, to this point is hard work. And, I had a job before I was able to legally have a job, and I was getting paid like $2 to sweep up a card store because my father loved collecting cards. And then the day that I was able to get a job, he took me filling out applications. So I've been employed my whole life.
Hmm.
And, I thank God to that. But yet it's also like I'm a 37-year-old, 60-year-old.
Mm.
But so high school, there's not any major events to really talk about. The most key thing that happened during high school was my mother had moved into a larger house. And it was like she had a full pretty much a full house. And it was for her and my sister and her boyfriend at the time. It was a house and her family. And she went back to the original guy that she left my father for, who I had gotten into fights with in the past. But at this point in my life, I had just been like, whatever. And not that I befriended him, but he was there. You know what I mean?
Yep.
But they eventually broke up, but she was still living in the house. But then she went off the deep end, and she was an alcoholic. So there was always beer, and it started being where she would be gone for the entire weekend, out with different guys or whatever. And at that point, it didn't even bother me as like a son mother point of view. It was just, what could I do to take advantage of this situation, right? Because I'm living with my father, who is straight as an arrow, and he is super strict. It's his way or the highway. And I love him for it. But when I had the chance to break free and I saw my opportunity to get freedom in another lane, and especially that I had that half and half lifestyle, I
Yeah.
took it. And me and my sister, as she got older, we started having parties. And, the first time I ever did a drug, smoked weed, I remember I was thinking about it. And I don't remember what grade I was in. And I want to say it was probably pre-high school, right before high school. And I said to my mother that I was thinking about it. And then the next weekend I was with her, she pulled a joint out of her purse and she's like, well, I'd rather you smoke it here with me. So that was her mentality. And it's messed up, but that was her mentality.
Sure.
So the first time I ever got high was with my mom. And the first time I ever got drunk was with my mom. And a lot of
Soon
first
thereafter,
time.
or do you know if that was
Oh,
soon?
yeah, pretty much all in the same time span. Because
Yeah.
once one thing happened, I knew I could
Sure.
try to push other things, right? And it wasn't that I wanted to, like the weed thing was an honest thing. I just heard kids talking about it. I see it in movies, haha, funny, let's try it, whatever. And same thing with the alcohol. And at first, I mean, it wasn't like an addiction, love at first sight, like things hit my lips and I just knew this is it and I'm doomed, thank God, actually. But I knew that that alternative lifestyle was something that intrigued me, kind of just living on the edge, right? Like not necessarily doing, you know, other than smoking weed, but not necessarily doing illegal things, but just being the rebellious one, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And I had the freedom to do it, and I didn't have any repercussions because what was my mother going to say to me when she was the first person to smoke weed with me, right? It's like I was able, so I held this manipulative role over her, and I did it probably in uh, a revenge way deep down, for what happened when I was 10 or 11.
Yeah.
But and I, these are all things that I've realized years later, but looking back, that was definitely the part of it. And I used it to my fullest advantage. And I mean, I can't even say, 80% of it was turned out to, that's why I said high school was awesome, right? Because it was just with my house was the party house. So it's like all those movies you see of like
Yeah.
crazy high school stuff.
That
I
was
lived
you.
it, right? That was me. And so 80% of the time it was just kind of harmless high school fun, right? But then 20% of the time things would go, a little haywire, whether it be, drinking too much and then, either somebody ends up getting behind the wheel and it's like, once we're 16, 17, we used to party in the woods a lot and have campfires out by these remote dams and, kids would fall. It was, it was well, that's still kind of average country stuff. It was just, we knew that we shouldn't have been doing it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that just kind of snowballed as the years went on, to be honest, right?
And
So then I
into college. Yeah. Yeah.
right. So I didn't go to college, as I said. So I graduated high school. And at that point, my father was like, okay, well, if you want to still live here, and at this point we were living in a house that he had moved into with my stepmother, and we renovated the basement. I had a beautiful bedroom, and it was, awesome. It was a beautiful place, nice yard. He still lives there to this day, and that was my normal life, right? So I was bouncing back between these two complete polar opposite lives, right? Where I couldn't, like, I started smoking cigarettes probably when I was 15. And now my father has smoked cigarettes his entire life, and my mother smoked cigarettes. So I guess it was just something that I picked up. And obviously I could smoke with my mother. She had no issues with it, but she had to pretend like she had issues with it when my dad got me. So it's
Sure.
this weird psychological thing. But eventually I think it was when I was like 17, my dad just gave up and just, smoke in the garage. But it was, I knew that the lifestyle I wanted to live couldn't be lived at my dad's. And at that time, I did not even think about getting my own place. Like I was still very coddled, right? Even though I wasn't pampered, I was still very coddled. I always felt like my father was going to be able to rescue me or get me out of situations, which proved true up to a certain point in the near future. But
That's
he
very
told me,
insightful. That's very
yeah.
insightful. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
And it's okay. And
Yeah.
he told me that, he said, listen, he said, you can stay here, here's certain rules. He gave me a late curfew. I was able to come and go pretty much as I pleased, except like at 3 a.m. or whatever. And I had a pretty serious girlfriend at the time. And, so I spent time with her, and it was it was and up to this point has been the most serious relationship in my life. It lasted like 7 to 8 years on and off, like between school and after school. I was very, looking back, I mean, it was such a toxic relationship. It's not even funny. Like it was, when it eventually ended, it was a good thing for both of us. And we ended up staying friends afterwards, which was phenomenal. When you're a teen and you think you're in love and you're 18 and you're not going to stay at your dad's, and you have this girl, and you could get away with murder at your mother's house. It's like eventually, even though I got a job, and it was 6 p.m. till 6 a.m., right? 4 days on, 4 days off. So you would leave the house at like 5 o'clock at night, get home at 6:30, 7 a.m., sleep until the next shift, right? And then
Mhm.
you would get 4 days off, and that sounds great. But the first 2 days you spend like sleeping, readjusting, and then you have like a day and a half to get normal errands done. So I did that for 3 months, and to be honest, I feel like I lost 3 months of my life. I don't remember a lot of it, right? And it was monotonous. That's what eventually broke my relationship, and it was one of those things where that's the first time I ever got fired from a job, but it was kind of like I was doing it to get fired in a
Yeah.
way, looking back. And I wasn't upset by it. And I told my father, and he said, "Okay, we'll just get another one." And I did, and I went back, and used to. I worked at a deli in a supermarket, and they had a huge food court. And I've always been into food and culinary and cooking, so I went and I worked there, and I did that for like 4 or 5 years. So now, like, I'm getting to the age of like, drinking 21, right? Now I've already been drinking and leading this double life between my father's and my mother's. And then at that time, as that relationship was ending, I was womanizing like crazy, and I had all these different girls, and I was going to this prom with that girl and this prom. It was just, it was a very hectic, crazy time. And I thought I was just being a teenage boy, but I should have just been growing up at that point, or starting to grow up at that point.
Yeah.
And eventually, I could not get a job after that firing, right? And it all came down to me failing a drug test for marijuana for this one job that my father's, and it was going to be a great job. Turns out the company went belly up like, 5 years ago. But it was going to be a great job for the time, and I failed the test, and he kicked me out, and I had nowhere to go. So, oh, where am I going to go? I'm just going to go live with my mother. I have a bedroom. I have, and that's what I did. And that's when things really turned completely and utterly south. And that was right around my 21st birthday.
What was the first thing? So I know it's probably very difficult to go back to certain periods. I know you were trying
Well,
to
yeah,
think.
no, I understand. And I mean, so my eventual crippling act would be opiates, right? So I became a very intense pill aficionado, as I used to like to think back when I was young and dumb. But I kid out, you asked
Oh, like
for
even
one.
getting some pride from knowing
Oh,
what,
absolutely.
yeah.
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 It was
Yeah,
because
I think of people,
I'm the smart one, right?
yeah,
So it's
you
like
yeah,
I could do it better.
I can
I
do it
could
better
do
than
it
you. Yeah.
safer, and I could, right, exactly.
I know
So,
exactly what the limit is and you don't, and
mm-hmm.
yep.
And but I mean it developed slowly to get to that point. It wasn't like it just went all in, right? So it's like, and I, not that I took pride off of that, but I knew my limits because I had slowly tested my limits, right? And around other people who were doing the same thing. And unfortunately, they were like family members and things, right? So at that time, my aunt, who has since passed, who was my mother's youngest sibling, actually. So my youngest aunt, and we were the closest, right? Because she was the youngest, I'm the oldest, and we were really good friends. And she got really bad into benzodiazepines like Xanax, and but just before we get skip ahead, when you first started, you said to recall a certain moment. I'll never forget one day I was walking down the street adjacent to my house, my mother's house, and I was with my best friend, who's my only true friend. And to this day, we still talk and hang out. But we were walking down the road, and he had a Time magazine, and on the front of the Time magazine was a Vicodin pill with the VIC, right? Vicodin. And it was a Time article about how Vicodin could be dangerous, right? And then like 2 days later, we're walking back up to my house, and he pulls out four Vicodin, right? And they were like Vicodin 750. I don't know. They weren't like the strongest, but they weren't the weakest. And we didn't know what we were taking, but we each took two, and we felt great. And that was the first time that I ever took a painkiller. And that was the time where I knew. I was like, when it hit, I was like, there's something going on here, right? Like, this is, now I feel, because I had, during all of this time of leading a double life, I had built up a huge anger management issue. And it was predominant, and, thank God, I've never laid a hand on a woman. I've actually never been in a real fist fight with another person, but walls, I would punch holes in walls all day long. I would wreck things, my car, mirrors, and and verbal abuse, right, to my mother, to my girlfriend. And looking back, it just amazes me at how hate and rage filled I was even before I was truly like an addict. And it was like, it's so clear now that I was searching for something to calm that down. And unfortunately, I went to the opiates, right? But, that's a effect of them. I can't deny the effect that they have. And it did, and it calmed me down. I mean, yeah, at that point, it was, I can't tell you the first time that I took it, what exactly happened. I just remembered that it was something that I knew I liked. And at that point, withdrawal and, like, the come down isn't a real thing, because you can't get any more. You know what I mean? You're just
Sure.
young kids anyway. But then once my aunt had started to clearly have connections, and now she's doing drug deals, and I'm starting to ask her, if I give her money, would she be able to get me something? And she would. And then, at that time, my mother got prescribed. So now this is at the time where, like, opiates are a good thing in the doctor's eyes, right? And benzos are a good thing. You have a headache, okay, here's a Vic. You get a tooth pulled, here's a Vicodin. So it was very easy to get a hold of,
Yeah.
and my mother had a prescription of benzos that she ended up getting addicted to and is still semi-addicted to this day. And it was just always kind of readily available. And it wasn't until I had gotten fired from that job and failed the job interview that it was when I was working for that supermarket that even, as that relationship was finally ending, because it ended like about a year into that supermarket job. She worked there. We started doing things together, right? So it's like I'm gonna share with her, I love her, right? So it's like if I'm getting these things, and then she liked it, right? Because she came from a pretty broken household as well. So then we were feeding off each other's sorrows, and then it turned into doing drugs, and then it turned into buying drugs, right? And then the financial thing came into it. And then it's like, okay, well, you're not working to save money anymore. You're working so that you could pay off the guy that you either got stuff fronted from or, whatever.
Yeah.
And, that's one thing that, pride coming back. One thing I prided myself on. I never ripped anybody off, right? I would never short anybody, no matter how much of a pit it put me in, I would make sure that I wasn't that guy, right? So I wouldn't lose, the repertoire with the plug,
Mm.
right? Because I was the guy who was friends with so many people, right? So I wanted to keep that network, right? I was like a master networker on the inside of my mind. So it started to take a toll, and that relationship finally ended. And it ended, and I was bouncing between women at the time, but I really, I've always been a codependent person, which is why the second half of this story is such a weird twist. But I found this girl who was a beautiful, she came from she had five brothers. They lived out in the country, shooting guns, just having a fun time, a hard, like true American family, right? And then I was really deep into addiction, and I was still just taking the opiates, right? Like I wasn't doing any, and Xanax, I guess. So I was mixing the two, but it was primarily I was starting to get withdrawals from it, and I needed it. And that led me to stealing out of the register at that job, right? So I stole the $20 bill. Yeah. Like, if you're gonna go for it, go for broke. But I took $20 and I got caught. And they said, okay, well, you could go to rehab. We'll send you to rehab. We're gonna fire you, basically. But
Yeah.
your insurance covers rehab and we care about you. You've worked here so long. So they sent me to my first rehab. Nothing really to write home about, but my insurance got canceled real quick, right? The detox I went through wasn't horrible because I wasn't as bad as I really thought I was. A lot of this was mental and just me being broke and a dumb kid, right? But while I was there, they said, oh, well, there's this, your insurance won't cover you, but there's this huge sober community down in Delray Beach, Florida. Sunny. They have a all day, all night Narcotics Anonymous, AA. You live at this house with these other guys, and you get a job. You're right on the beach, and and here I am. I don't remember the exact age, like 23 maybe, and I'm like, okay, whatever. And my dad was willing to pay for the ticket and my first like month of rent before, so I could get a job and everything. So I'm like, all right. And I broke up with this girl, called my sister. I said, pack me a suitcase. She brought it up to the rehab, and I didn't ever go back home. Things were
Wow.
falling apart at my mother's house at the time. I just got on a plane and I went to Florida. And that was the start of a crazy adventure. I look back with a smile on my face now because I just have to. But I mean, it was something out of a movie. I landed and I ended up being on the plane with one other kid from like two towns over who I had never met, who was from the same rehab, getting sent to the same place. And we were both scheduled to see the same guy. This guy's name was Alex Linsky. And we're like, well, how are we going to know it's him or whatever? They're like, no, he'll be waiting for you, whatever. So we get off in West Palm Beach International Airport because Delray, I don't know if you're familiar, but it's very very south Florida. It's south of like Mar-a-Lago
Okay.
and north of Fort Lauderdale, in between. So we're standing out there, two Pennsylvania dudes, right? And I don't remember what time of year it was. And all of a sudden, this Lexus comes screaming up with these huge chrome rims, right? Tinted out jet black. And this huge, tall Russian guy gets out. He's skinny and he's got like Bermuda shorts on and a Hawaiian t-shirt. And back in the day, I remember when the Bluetooth like actually lit up blue, right? And he gets out of this Lexus and he goes, "Hey, I'm Alex Linsky, bro." He goes, "Are you Jeff?" Like, what the hell have I gotten myself into? Like, I'm like, I didn't have a cell phone. I wanted to call my dad and be like, "I'm not leaving the airport. Just buy me a ticket home." Like, I don't know what's going on. But I got in the car. And then just the last part of that experience, before we even made it out of the airport parking lot, he got pulled over for doing 90 miles an hour by a Florida state.
That's a horrible start. What the heck?
I know, but so we were off, right? And so we get off I-95 and you could kind of see the ocean, but instead of taking a left towards the ocean, he takes a right. And now when you're in Florida, the further you get away from the ocean, the less quality neighborhoods tend to be. And we started going away from the water and we went like 85 blocks. And then we pulled into, I mean, it was the hood, right? And it was, I mean, looking back, I loved living there, but it was the hood and it scared me like out of my, I'm from,
Yeah.
Northeast Pennsylvania. And
Yep.
now, and I've traveled here and there. I've flown to Virginia Beach when I was a kid, spent time, and even down to Florida. But here I am, right? 23, and I'm a light bulb in a neighborhood, and we are all these kids, like 8 of us in this little tiny 1 floor house. We're each paying like $500 a week. It was like a total scam. This is before the housing crisis and all this happened. This is part of that, right? I'd lived in this, chaos down there. And it was wild. But I did what I had to do. I
It
ended up
was a
staying.
rehab, right?
Well, it was a sober house, right?
Okay.
So my insurance cut the rehab. So this was like a sober house. And we were drug tested and we had to
Okay.
go to AA meetings and they had, it was somewhat legit, right? I'm not going to throw it all shade. They attempted to be legit. Looking back now that I know that there was a lot of shady things going on there. But at the time, there were other people there with the same intent as me, and they were earnest about it, right? Like at least the other residents. So there were a couple of good people there, and I stayed clean. I ended up actually flying home, getting my car, and then putting it on the auto train because I figured this is a new beginning. I'm going to go down there and live. I had ended up getting a job, and I was getting paid more than I had ever been paid up in Pennsylvania. I had started looking for places to live because I had done my designated time that I had to do, right?
Sure.
But whatever. That's what eventually ended up happening. I got a couple of good jobs here and there, and I ended up working for this guy who is now in jail for fraud. It was a telemarketing service that we were a debt consolidation firm, right?
Okay.
But yet, right next door, he owned a what do they call them? Debt collection agency. So it's like here he's saying that he wants to consolidate your debt and help you from the debt collectors. Well, he had a debt collection agency on the other side. Yeah, it was shady, and we were getting paid way too much money, and but it was like it when people talk about those times in Florida, it was like that, and I kind of lived it, like just the lavish cars and things were, and I began to see the other side, right? So now I'm living this kind of lavish lifestyle, and I begin to see the true side of Florida, right? Like what Florida could really be about. And of course, it was dragged on. It was started with a pretty girl, as it
Hmm.
normally does, right? So there was this girl who I worked with, and she grew up in, she was a very privileged girl, grew up in the same neighborhood that Dan Marino lived, and we hit it off, but nothing ever really went far. But she ended up becoming like my party buddy. And to make, there's not any fun time stories. After I decided that prescription pills were something I wanted to give another round, because down there the prices were so cheap and
Oh my
the
gosh.
content was so much more strong because doctors were illegally giving out scripts. So everywhere you walked in South Florida at that time, there were pain management clinics. And if you knew the right one, you could go in and just pay the doctor
I
$450 for the visit. And he would literally ask you what you wanted. He would write the scripts and you would have valid prescriptions. It was so bad that even getting those valid prescriptions filled at pharmacies, they were out of stock for sometimes weeks at a time. So people were driving like through the Everglades to Clearwater, and like it was just to get prescriptions filled.
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
What?
Even though I was with some of those high end people, I started hanging out with some of the other end people as well because I talked to everybody. And so I started getting in gritty, and that was the first time that I tried the needle. It was kind of off to the races at that point, and it didn't take long for things to deteriorate. And at that point, it was still the pills because they were so cheap. So it was, in my mind, it's like, okay, well, I'm doing this horrible thing, but it's still medication coming from a pharmacy, right?
Yep. Yep.
Um,
You could justify
yeah.
anything. Yeah.
But anyway, so things got so bad. I had ended up living with a crackhead who beat his wife and ended up getting arrested. And I didn't know they were squatting when I first rented with them, but they were squatting, and it was a $500,000 house. I should have known. But at that point, I checked myself into a rehab or a detox, not a rehab, but just a detox. I wanted to get clean. I was going to get my last paycheck. During this time, I worked at a restaurant owned by Danny DeVito, and there are some really cool stories that come from there. But that was like one of the good aspects of living down there. But then, I managed to work. Like I said, I've worked my entire life. So even during all this chaos, I somehow managed to keep it together to go to work. And I loved kitchens, so it was a great, task. Plus, it was a great way to meet connections, right? But while I was in this detox, one of my fellow cooks stole my car and wrecked it. So when I got out of the detox, I didn't have a car. I didn't have anywhere to go. I didn't want to go back with a crackhead. So I walked 20 miles down the tracks from West Palm Beach to Delray Beach. And I went to my sous chef and said, "Hey, I need my last paycheck. Can I sleep at your house for 2 nights? I'm getting a plane home." And that's what happened. And thank God, right? I don't know what made me do that, right? But I just
Yeah.
knew I needed to get out of there before things got any worse. And my father wasn't willing to get me out of there, but he said if I came back, he'd take me back as long as I adhered to rules. And when I came back, I didn't adhere to those rules. I had had a taste of the madness, and it just wanted to pursue. And by the time I got back, my mom was living with the crackhead. I got kicked out of my dad's house very quick. I was messing around with just the dirtiest of dirty people, and of course, Pennsylvania wasn't like Florida, so the cheap pills and cheap product wasn't available. So the only thing around here for somebody who liked to use a needle was heroin. And that's what it eventually went to. And it just got out of control.
How did you
It got,
function? I don't understand. Because
well, no,
again, you kept the
so
job. You said you kept the job through
no,
all. How do you
yeah,
function?
and I did. And I mean, I wanted to say that I like to pride myself as being a functional addict, right? So I knew what I needed to do to get through work, and then I knew that I had X amount of hours before I needed to get ready for work, and not to not out long enough, right? And then
Yeah.
then eventually I started using at work, and then but it was an epidemic down there, and it turned into I couldn't put it on for much longer, right? It wouldn't have happened. It wouldn't have worked. That's okay though. Like thank God I couldn't have put it on any longer. I was only home for 4 months before I eventually got arrested. And in that very short span, kicked out of my dad's house, living with my mother and this crackhead. She gets kicked out of his house. We're homeless. I start breaking into vehicles to justify, just to be able to feed us and things like that. But then I start noticing that, well, okay, she got an apartment now, and it's a little basement apartment, trash hole. But okay, now I could start stealing stuff to get high, right? So then I started using that mentality. And over the course of things, I eventually stole a firearm out of somebody's vehicle. And I didn't know it was a firearm. I thought it was like a tool case, right? Because I just would go into unlocked vehicles. I wasn't like, I'm just trying to keep it easy, even though I'm committing felonies, right? And
Yeah.
but that's my mentality at the time. But when I got home and opened up that gun, I knew like there was no going back. And I was so messed up, I didn't even remember where I took it from, right? So I could like I wanted to just take it back, right? And thinking of I could have just thrown it in the woods or something and it would have been over with. But why not try to call up somebody who knows somebody who wants a gun who might have drugs? And that's what happened. And it was the shadiest deal of my life. I can't believe I made it out without dying, but I did. And it was the worst decision of my life as well, because it's the one that came back to bite me in the butt and end up really getting, the hammer on me when it came down to jail. But it wasn't the thing that got me caught. What got me caught was using a stolen credit card at a Walmart late at night. And once again, I don't remember that night. I don't remember doing anything. But the next day, I guess we were going to cop, and the same car that I was in that night at Walmart in the parking lot. How ironic. We're on our way going through the intersection. The cops were on their way back from Walmart reviewing the footage, and then they see us, and three cruisers surround us. And I was so dumb, right, that I looked at my friend and I'm like, "What'd you do?" And then they came around and they looked at all three of us and they said, "That's the guy." And they pulled me out and put me in handcuffs. And like, up to that point in life, like the area I come from, you have these small scraps with police and they know you, you know them, they know your family, but I've never been in cuffs. And, it was like everything just hit me like a ton of bricks in that moment.
How old were you at that point?
This was 2009. I was born in 86.
Okay. Yeah, 23.
Yeah. Yeah, it was rough. And, even at the time of the arrest, and I thought, I'm going to go down and get booked, get out. And I ended up not seeing the outside of a jail until 2010, the end of 2010, almost 2011. And I remember I called my dad when I got to county after I eventually got booked. They took me to night court and everything. And, he always told me my whole life, and he said, if you ever call me from jail, I'm not going to come get you. And I called him, and he said, "Well, I'm happy that you're not dead." He said, "But you're going to have to figure this one out on your own." I had a detox in there with nothing. They didn't offer any help at this point in 2009 or anything, and I was very bad. So the first like 48, 72 hours, I really don't remember. And then I got called up to the warden's office, and here I am, like 4 days in jail, and they call me up to the warden's office. And I'm like, what do they want with me? I'm just out of detox. And they say, and I get into the office, and there's the head Pennsylvania state trooper, like the guy who's in charge of every single Pennsylvania state trooper. And they say, "Mr. Klem, first, let us tell you what we know." They're like, "We know that you stole a silver 9mm Kimber out of the mayor's car."
What the?
And I'm like, and I'm the first time I'm hearing it, right? And I'm just sitting there listening. They're like, "And we know that you sold it to so and for so and blah, blah, blah." And all I said was, "Well, you know a lot." I said, like, what else can I say to that? But at the time, there was a murder, and it ended up being a gang killing. But around the same time I got arrested, there was this huge investigation going on for this huge gang killing that happened in our area, and it was done with a state trooper's gun. And they thought that because I was in the gun stealing trade, that I might have tips for them. And unfortunately, I wasn't in the gun stealing trade, and I did not have any tips for them. But that was the most, funny thing that could have happened in my first, couple of days in jail. But they ended up, it was the mayor, and then they racked up everything else that I had confessed to because I just spilled my guts out thinking the truth will set you free. Looking back, I don't take back getting arrested. It saved my life. I don't take back jail. It taught me so many good things as well as bad things. But I would have just shut up. When you get arrested, kids, just shut up. But it was it turned out to be, like I said, a long adventure. I got sentenced to state prison, but I got what they consider a light sentence. It was called the State Intermediate Punishment Program, where I would have to do a year of state prison time. During that time, I would go to drug counseling in jail. And then after that, I would have to spend 6 months in a therapeutic community, which is a very structured, like team built, member
Okay.
ran community for recovery. Uh, it's a cult, but it did its job. uh, and then 6 months at a state-run halfway house, work release type thing. And then, so I did it all. And eventually I landed a job at this manufacturing facility, making vinyl windows, replacement windows, like
Okay.
for houses. And I didn't know I was a cook, right? So I didn't know anything about this, but I knew that I was doing it. I was saving money. I was learning discipline. Jail taught me how to be alone with myself, right? It taught me how much I loved reading and writing. Jail to me was so much of a savior that I can't see. I didn't have any negative experiences in jail. Like I said, I talk and get along with everybody, so there was very few times I had contentions with anybody. I could be very passive in situations when I need to be. I could be aggressive when I need to be. So jail was an internal thing for me, right? I spent a lot of time in books, a lot of times writing. I write music, and I read anything I could get my hands on.
Wow.
But faith was not anything in my, mirror, right? So getting back on the topic of faith, I was confirmed, right? Before all of my family unit fell apart and my grandmother had stopped going to church. That was the only thing holding my father to going to church. And of course, my mother was on the outs because they had an annulment through the church. So church was just something that had ceased to have any importance or any meaning in my life. And I was so caught up in everything that I didn't even stop to even think about theological questions, right? You know what I mean? Like, who stops to think about those things when you're in such a tumultuous situation where
Yeah.
you're just trying to survive, right? And eventually I got out of jail, or I mean, I got into that halfway house. I got an apartment near where I was working. I got promoted. Eventually I got myself in front of a computer and they saw what I could do. And I was put in charge of their manufacturing software. I mean, it took many years. This is all a, nutshell type story, but
Yeah.
I worked my ass off and I stayed sober. I did everything that I had to do. I got a new car. I have an apartment. I got a cat, I still love that cat. I still have that apartment. I just don't have that car anymore. But, I did everything that you're supposed to do. And I was doing great. I kept getting promoted. And then eventually I got a job offer from networking, right? So I had the opportunity to meet a lot of people who have been on Shark Tank. I've had the opportunity to go to cocktail parties with multimillionaires, people who I'm not from that world, right? But I've always grown up mixed with a variable crowd. So I've always been mixed with that world in some type of way. And, I took pride in that and work became my God, right? So it was like, I was no longer getting high and women weren't something that I could even consider. It was like, okay, I'm building this. There's something here. I could tap into my knowledge. And I did so good and I got promoted so quickly and my salary grew, but nothing in my life grew, right? It was just things. And while those material things would satisfy me to a degree, I just felt like I was trying to fill this constant empty hole in myself. And as much as I would love getting the kudos from work, and even when things went bad, I would get pride in how I solved it or how I put more hours in than anybody, even though I wasn't getting paid overtime, and it was just, but it was all internal. I don't know how much other people around me got that, but that was something that I know that drove me so hard and so fast. And when you're driving that hard and that fast and you're so focused, the moment that you kind of veer off path, you have all that momentum. And now all of a sudden you're going in the wrong direction, right? And that's what happened when I had relapsed, and the world just got dark, right? So if I thought things were bad prior, pardon me,
Yeah.
uh, to jail, they were, and they were horrible in their own way, right? Like Florida was a rat race, everything. But now all of a sudden I'm an adult, right? And I have all this knowledge and I know I'm better than all that. Work's been anything that I'm praising, right? I don't have any moral guideline, right? And
Yeah.
I'm caught up in my own brain, so I'm consuming all of this information. It's all like, I'm sorry, physics and atomic physics and everything. Like I'm absorbing it all, and I'm reading all these papers, and I'm taking in all this information about the universe. And I love astrophysics and astronomy and cosmology more than astronomy. It just intrigued me to a point where I was like, well, there has to be something, right? And then around this time, that's when my sister, who is 4 years younger than me, told me she was having a baby. And I was stoked, right? I was going to be an uncle. Even though I had relapsed, I was still working, and it hadn't gotten to the point where I was doing heroin, right? I had just started taking pills here and there. So it was like I started from the beginning,
I
right?
was just gonna say
And
that's like going
yeah,
right back to the beginning.
exactly. And but then my sister, I had not known, had started going really down a dark road. And I had not been keeping tabs. And the guy that she had been pregnant with uh, got her started using the needle. And they got the baby taken away, and his parents got custody, and he used to beat her and all these things. And I just had to sit back and watch because I didn't want to go to jail, right? Like I can't react. Like in this world you can't do anything, and it's like when the cops can't do certain things with domestics. And she didn't want to get better, and it was just this tumultuous time in my head. And I didn't get to see my niece, and that's when things just spiraled. And it's not an excuse, right? Like
Yeah.
things aren't an excuse, but it was definitely a motivator for me to just stop caring, right? Here I am. I can't find a woman. I might be successful, but I have no savings because nobody taught me anything about finances. And when they tried to, I just rejected it because I knew better, right? My whole world was collapsing, right? And somehow I managed to keep a straight face at work to the best of my ability, but I have a 9 to 5 job, so it's like kind of come in, do your thing, leave, thank God I have an office job, and I was able to kind of hide from some of this hurt and this despair that I was in. I didn't have anybody to talk to. My mother was as much of a wreck as I was about the whole situation. That's her granddaughter, you know what I mean? So I can't, and my father was just, I felt like I was a kid again, carrying messages back and forth between them, and I just couldn't take it. And at that time, I thought, the only solution, I said, and I'm not a suicide person, right? Or I can't, unalive, I apologize, but I'm not somebody who believes in that, right? I truly don't. Because I've dealt with my mother threatening that to me when I was a kid, right? And having to talk her down. But it was just me saying, well, it's not that, but I don't want to go to jail, but I have to
Yeah.
do something to save my sister. So I made the decision that I was going to take action against him. And then, in the process, there may be action against myself, to avoid any consequences, right? But I would at least free my sister. And This was in 2022, and it was the holidays, and I had to be back at work January 3rd, 2022. And on January 2nd, 2022, I got into a car to go get drugs, and I had already been drinking that day. Now, I was not drunk, right? But I had been drinking earlier, and I had taken Xanax earlier. So I was kind of, and alcohol and Xanax don't really mix very well, right? So, but that had been hours earlier. I pick up my friend, we go a couple towns down, we get our stuff, we start heading back. Now, I did not do any of the opiate, right? But as we start heading back, I lose consciousness, right? Now, I don't know. I know, like, I've always been a bigger, smaller person. My nutrition was horrible. It could have been a diabetic spike or whatnot. All I remember is that I lost consciousness. And then when I came to, I saw that we were about to crash, right? We were about to crash into parked. It looked to me like parked cars, but it was at a stoplight. They were stopped at a stoplight. So we were doing 45. So the last thing I see is I open up and I see that we're about to crash. And I just remember saying, well, let it happen, right? Like kind of. And I remember lifting my right leg up to try to hit the brake, but there was no chance. And I think because I kind of just said, let it happen, I relaxed myself and probably saved me. But we hit them doing 45, and all the load was on my side of the car. The pictures of the car are horrendous. But luckily, nobody else was hurt and nobody else's cars were totaled, right? So I don't know how that happened. And my passenger was completely fine. But when we hit and impacted, I was completely knocked out. And, at that point, I pretty much died. And it was it was the most relaxing, loving, peaceful embrace. That's the only way that I could describe it. And like I just knew that everything was gonna be okay, right? Like no matter, like it was like all of a sudden everything, even like people who were gonna be lost or hurt or without me, like I knew that wherever I was at that moment or however many moments, like I knew that it was gonna be okay. But then as fast as that feeling came, I woke up in the ambulance and they had defibbed me, and they were like, and I came to and they were cutting my shirt off and I could hear them cutting my pants off, and they're like, don't look down. And I was like, okay. And at that point, I knew something was wrong with my right leg. I had a huge shooting pain from there, and it was either gone or it was broken to bits. And thankfully, it was the latter. It was broken to bits. And they get me to the hospital. They put me through a CAT scan. I ended up being 10 pounds within the limit of having my leg amputated, because if I was, 10 pounds heavier, they needed to end up putting two titanium rods and 37 screws to rebuild my tibial plateau. It's just shattered like a snowball. And I ended up having to get two surgeries. I was immobile for 4 months. I could not load weight on it for 4 months. But you know what? While I was sitting in that hospital bed and I was not in handcuffs and I was not getting approached by insurance company, like, as things started to develop and they transported me from the hospital to a nursing home, it was like a rehab facility where they would do, rehab for people. It was a fun experience, especially during COVID, plastic hanging wall mats everywhere and
Sure.
everything. But I never caught it through all of that. Uh, Tested every damn day. I had to go live with my mother, but during all that, that's the first time in my life where I was like, you know what? There's a reason I'm here. I've been through all of these crazy things, but like there's a reason why I'm here. And I don't know what it is, but I've always felt that, right? And then I start looking back through my life, like Jeff, like you've always went your own way, but you've done it because you've had this weird intuition from the time you were a child that you were supposed to do something, right? Like I was just, and I know that sounds cynical, possibly narcissistic in a way, but like it's just something that's true. It's something that's inside of me, right? And the people I meet tell me, to tell my story and to say these things because I guess I can touch people or I can, share something. So that's why have started to do this. And it's, I saw the people who actually cared, right? When you're in a hospital bed and you've just survived a life-altering accident, the people who come and see you, the things that happen, like I felt so unworthy. You know what I mean? Like it was just guilt, not survive. It was like, you can't do this for me. Why are you doing this for me? I've been horrible to you. I've been a horrible human being. I'm not worthy of your love and mercy. But yet these people showed me love and mercy. And it just absolutely touched my heart. And it gave me the determination I needed to stay sober, but also to get up off my ass and push and rehab. And, within 4 months, I was back in my third floor apartment, walking up 3 flights of stairs every day. Um,
Unbelievable. What about the moment, or maybe a few moments of recognizing that you're here for a reason and activating that? Going back, did you start thinking of your Catholic upbringing
yeah.
as small of a piece as that was? How did
So,
you connect
no,
all these
so at
things?
that point, right? So once I had gotten back up on my feet, and this is 2022, going into the summer 2022, that's when I started to, okay, I'm going to take work a little bit more seriously. I'm clean now. I'm a new man, right? Like I've been given a new lease on life, and I'm going to do everything that I can with it. Um, and, through that time, thank God, things kind of worked out with my sister. Unfortunately, that gentleman ended up passing away from a horrific car accident. And, I pray for him. And it's just one of those things that, it's awkward how the universe works. But my sister moved home and she's with the baby. And I got to spend Mother's Day with them. It was beautiful. I thank God for that. And I started off down the informational road, right? So I had already been started to read like physics and stuff before I started getting high, but now I really took it seriously. So I started watching major videos, reading major papers, and just absorbing knowledge, right? Like I'm like a sponge when it comes to certain things. Like I don't watch cable, I don't watch TV, I watch podcasts, I read papers. I don't really have media in my house, even though I'm surrounded by computer screens at work every day. I started going down this, and I remember I came across, I think it was a Jordan Peterson video, right? And this was like even before, or maybe it was like after he had blown up. I don't know, because I haven't been, at that point, I hadn't been keeping up with the world, right? I had been just dealing with my own stuff, right?
Yeah.
But now that I'm content, I have to start to broadcast out and know what's going on so I know how to present myself to the world, right? So if I want to be a new man, I need to understand what I'm stepping into to prepare myself properly, right? And that's the long way that got me to, well, I need to prepare myself with some spiritual armor. So, I'd always been into psychedelics and things like that growing up as well. And I had used them as therapy even after getting clean from opiates. I don't recommend it. I won't do it now. But, for certain people in certain psychotic situations, it can be a helpful tool. But at least what it gave me is undoubtable proof of the spirit realm, right? And I know that that sounds crazy to a lot of people, but to me, it's 100% real. So taking the leap to supernatural wasn't hard for me, but it was taking the leap to the one God, our one Lord. And so as I'm digging through this, I'm like, all these people are saying that God doesn't exist, but yet nobody has the answer to, you know what I mean? It's like, okay, well, the Big Bang. Well, like, well, okay, that's a miracle, right? So it's like, if you give me one miracle, then I could believe everything. Or yeah, if I give you one miracle, then I could believe everything else that you said. And I mean, I'm a very scientific person. I love biology and, archaeology and things like that. So that's why I went at it with a real analytical mind, right? So I start watching all these videos, and I think I came across Jordan Peterson and one time, and he was talking about the Bible. And that's when I first started thinking about like my Catholic youth and my upbringing with the Bible, right? God, wait a second, like, all right, well, God, I know Jesus, like I know the stories, I know the traditions, that didn't work for me. But well, like, well, why didn't it work for you? Well, wait a second. I guess I had a really good time growing up in the church, like I used to love serving mass. I love the priest. I love everybody around it. The holidays, they're so special, during those golden years, right? So it was being romanticized in my brain. And then I started coming across your videos and Pints of Aquinas and, other people just in this media space. And it really made me think like, man, like something might be up, right? Like I know that I just knew that there was something with Jesus, right? I didn't have a church figured out, but I knew that Jesus, the story connected with me, right? And then during this time of mental grappling, I'm digging through our warehouse, and when I say I found a treasure chest, I literally mean a treasure chest. It was like a old wooden chest with a top latch, you know what I mean? And I find this chest in our warehouse, and I'm going through it. They said you could have it, and it's got all this old stuff in it from the 30s and 40s, and I ended up being able to auction some older books off. But in there, I found this blue uh New Testament, right? New Testament and Psalms. And I have it right here because I carry it with me all the time.
Awesome.
They issued these to the military branches for the Second World War. So there was one in green, there was one in blue, and there was one in brown, I believe, right? So it was for Army, Navy, and Marines. And this one was for the Navy. And when I open this, the first page it says to Grandma Ann from grandson Jimmy, Seaman Second Class U.S. Navy, March 28th, 1943. Right. So just the historical aspect of that just caught me off guard. And here I am, a historic junkie, right? First time I'm picking up a Bible. And then I turn and I see, the American flag, and it has a foreword from FDR here, right?
Oh my
President of the
gosh.
United States. I mean, it's just one paragraph, but I want to read it real quick if you don't mind.
Of
It
course.
says, so it was penned on January 25th, 1941, the White House, Washington, to the armed forces. As Commander in Chief, I take pleasure in commending the reading of the Bible to all who serve in the armed forces of the United States. Throughout the centuries, men of many faiths and diverse origins have found in the sacred book words of wisdom, counsel, and inspiration. It is a fountain of strength and now, as always, an aid in attaining the highest aspirations of the human soul. Very sincerely yours, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And when I saw that an American politician would put something like that in a Bible, I just figured, you know what? I've been thinking about this. I know Jesus is something. I'm going to read it. And when I opened it up, I think I skipped to John. I don't know why. Something just told me to do it. And I can't explain it. But I read through John, and I read through it in like probably an hour, right? And I was like, it read like a novel for the first time in my life. Like I've tried to read the Bible, especially when I was in jail. I thought I'm going to read the Bible just to say I read the Bible. And I was like reading, numbers when I was in jail. It was like nothing made any sense. And all of a sudden I'm reading these stories, and it's just like I'm seeing all these little insights that we've talked about throughout this conversation and reflecting them back to points in my life and relationships I've had and interactions I've had with other people. And I just came away from it crying, right? And I couldn't get enough. And like, I can't even name one passage. I can't name, it was just an experience that, right now I'm actually going through the Bible and really trying to take it seriously. But this was just like a
Yeah.
true, just my heart soaking it up experience. So then I start watching testimonials, right? Now I had already seen yours, but then I start seeing a lot of Protestant testimonials come up. And as I start watching these, these are like more raw testimonials, kind of like how I gave here. And you don't always get that with some of the Catholic stuff. And I'm not judging the Catholic stuff or anything, but I just, some of those people, the people who are truly like, Jesus, sola scriptura, they have very interesting stories, some of them. Not saying that we don't either. They at least broadcast it more. And it was insightful. So then I start watching things about these new age churches, right? And it was kind of like, okay, well, that's a different thing. And then I was really thinking, I had an address for one in Virginia, and it was going to be a 4-hour drive, but I was like, you know what? These people seem like I could get along with them. I was looking for friendship, right? Because I'm still isolated. I'm still by myself.
Yeah.
I need community. And I'm realizing this now, right? So at least I'm making the steps and trying to get it. And I was praying one night, and I just decided to pray, right? Because I was reading the Bible. So I said, I'm going to say the prayers that I know. And I said the Our Father and Hail Mary. And I remember when I pray, I just talk to God sometimes like he's just there, right? Like that's the way that I pray, is just have a conversation. And I was just crying. I said, God, I said, just please. I said, show me the way. I said, just tell me what the right thing for me to do is. Like, I'll do whatever you want, as long as, whether it's a good thing or bad things come, as long as it's in your faith and walking with you to know you better, I'm okay with it. And in my heart and in my head, I heard, just go. And I'm like, and that was the first time in my life outside of like a psychedelic experience that I had heard something like that. And now I already believe in this stuff, so I wasn't really freaked out by it, right? But I was still like, okay, something. And at that point in my life, small things start happening. I would start talking about something with somebody, and then I'd see like a billboard the next day. You know what I mean? And like these serendipitous
Yeah.
things started coming together. And during that summer, I had been praying in the garden of this cathedral. I mean, it could be, it was meant to be the cathedral for our diocese, but it was built in 1864, St. John's in Pittston, Pennsylvania. It's a beautiful, huge church, and right down the road from my house. And they have a court with a statue of Mary. And I would pray there at nights in summer as I was reading the Bible. And one Saturday, it was like 3 o'clock, and I said, just go. Like the church is right there, just go. So I put on some nice clothes and I walked down to the church, and I walked in for Saturday Mass. And I got there a little bit early. So I was sitting there, and I went up to like the third pew, and I knelt down. I blessed myself, and I started talking to this old lady next to me. Her name was Mary. She introduced herself. I said, yeah. I said, this is the first time I've been at church in a long time. And she's like, it's okay. So just come back. So then mass started, and I can't tell you a single reading. I can't tell you anything, but as what happens with a lot of people, I just kind of spent the time bawling my eyes out and just feeling comfort, right? Like just like something was right. Like I was there, and like when he said those words, and it was like I was back up on the altar as an altar boy, and it was like I knew the right things to say, and I knew it was like all of a sudden somebody was trying to put this puzzle piece into this spot and just couldn't turn it the right way. And at that moment it just got clicked, and it was just like it was the most beautiful feeling and experience, you know what I mean? And I stuck behind, and I talked to the priest, and introduced myself. Even at that point, I knew that I was onto something. It was it was amazing. I can't say anything other than that. Shortly thereafter, it took me that summer and the following fall, but then it was Advent of this past Christmas that I said, this is it. Like I'm gonna take this seriously. I'm gonna confess, I'm not gonna watch porn anymore. That was my not I don't want to say, but that was my vice, right? As being a single guy just working and living to work, right? That was a big deal for me to be able to stop that, and to go to my first confession. And that was an experience that I can't put into words, right? So I knelt down and and I said, Father, I said, forgive me for I have sinned. I said, it's been 12 years since my last confession. And he said, what took you so long? I said, well, life. And I said a couple of things. And then he's like, can I get up and meet you around the back? And I said, yeah. And I got up and I met him and he just gave me a big hug and he just said, come back. And, that's, Father Joe. He's been the kindest soul to me and welcomed me back into the arms of the church. He's given me a cell phone number. I've attended groups, every adult faith formation meeting. From that moment, I received the Eucharist all through Advent. I took my mother to midnight mass on Christmas, and it was absolutely beautiful. Easter, Lent was just an amazing season for me. I fasted. I did my own fast. I stuck to it. I said the rosary every day for 40 days and 40 nights. And that was a commitment that I really set to myself, to be steady in prayer, to get into a prayer routine. I started meditating, but meditating with like the Lord in mind. And I use a technology called HemiSync, but it really gets me into that weird subconscious zone where I think the ethereal lives. What made me dive into the church head first after the confession was, now that I'm absorbing this world around me, I don't like what I see. And it's it was part of what was driving me crazy, right? Is seeing the madness of the world and not being able to have any power or control. So it was just all of that, not having any power and control, seeing the world go crazy, what's up is down, what's left from right, and knowing that I'm not crazy and I know that up is up and left is left and right is right. It's made me become a more committed citizen, a more committed human being. And it was truly the love and forgiveness of other individuals, even the people who I hate the most, that truly set me free from the anger that I had. I have a relationship with my mother now. Even though I didn't speak well of her, I love her to death. She's still my mother. She gave birth to me, and I thank God for that. you know, my father the same. He did the best that he could do. They both did. He didn't know what I was doing on the other side, so how could he have known to parent me differently, right? But to everybody, I just want to say God loves you. Jesus is merciful, and that is the most plentiful thing that he could give you. There's no hiding from your sin. Your sin is something that you should actually embrace because it's part of every single one of us. And until we embrace our sin, I live in a world of time. What happened yesterday is yesterday. It doesn't matter if I relapse today. I know that tomorrow I'm not going to, and yesterday was yesterday. Now I pray that that's not going to happen, but it's for metaphor and euphemism. But I really appreciate the chance to sit here and talk with you today, Eddie. And I hope that, you're able to get something out of this. I hope anybody who watches is able to get something out of it.
Jeff, thank you. Thank you so much. I think I heard every word that you were saying, trying to appreciate the detail and appreciate all the dots that you connected, that by God's grace, that you connected those dots and that it all
Yep.
led back to the Lord's church and to be now with the community. And always, I just know that as you get more and more, I think I shared this with another gentleman recently, as you get more and more secure, I guess, in the faith, I can just see how the community is going to thrive where you are, because we need people that are vulnerable about what happened, what they did, And in no way does that discount dignity. In no way does it discount value.
Exactly.
It
Right.
is, it, it's so darn important. And
It's the
it
woman at the well.
absolutely it is. And yeah, God bless you for having the courage to share it. And I'll
I
be,
appreciate it.
yeah, no, I was on the verge of tears many times and had a lot of trouble keeping it together. But
It's all right.
you know, it's just
But
it's a beautiful thing to see what God does and what he's doing. So thank
and
you.
what he's going to do.
And what he's going to do, yeah, in the church and in the world. So as I said, God bless you. Thank you so much. Everyone, please share this video. And I appreciate all of you as well. And please pray. Please pray for more and more stories to come out like this that talk about what redemption looks like. God bless you.
Thank you very much.